this tutorial, I'm going to show you how I make buttercream stripes and this fault line cake, which is honey mead themed, and I'll tell you more about that later. Okay, so to start off, I have 3 cake layers here, and this layer is actually made in a 4-inch tin with a little bit extra batter. So that layer is a little bit thicker than my other 2, which were baked in 3-inch tins. I'm going to level each of them, take the top off so that they're nice and level with my little leveler there. And then I'm going to torte these chocolate layers, the ones that were baked in the 3-inch tin. I'm going to torte them once, basically in half. And then that middle tier, that vanilla, I'm going to torte twice so that it's in the sections of 3. Okay, so this is basically going to be a double barrel cake in order to create this fault line look. Okay, so I've just torted those chocolate layers. Okay, so now I have got my 6-inch cake card. These are 6-inch cakes, by the way. Put a little buttercream on my card, and then I'm going to fill in the layers. Okay, so I've got the first layer that I torted, got my buttercream. I'm going to add the second piece on top of that. And then I'm going to add more buttercream on top of this. Now, we want to put supports in this cake because it's so tall, because it's a double barrel. You can put the supports in wherever you want to put them in, but I was just making it easy for myself. So I actually put the supports in now. You can put them halfway up the cake, or you can put them in now like I'm doing. You just want to make sure that whatever cake you have is without supports, that the cake is no taller than 7 inches high is the tallest I would absolutely go without supports. Everybody's different, but that's kind of my rule of thumb. Okay, so I put supports in that first 2 layers on the bottom. Now I'm building the rest of my cake, and I will be putting the rest of this cake on top of those supports so that I don't have to worry about any bulging or, my cake collapsing on me in any way as I go along. Okay, so just building that vanilla section. Remember, this is the one that I cut into 3 sections. And then buttercream in between each section, and adding my chocolate other layers on top. Keep in mind, these are all 6-inch round cakes. So this is just one very tall 6-inch round tier that is really a double barrel, and it has supports in the bottom of it. Okay, so this is actually the top part. All together, there's no supports in this section of the cake. But I'm just kind of cleaning it up, getting my buttercream nice and cleaned up. Okay, so now remember, I've got supports in the bottom section, and I'm placing this one on top of it. Again, you can put those supports wherever you want in this cake. You can make them more, halfway up the cake, whatever. This was easy for me, so this is how I did it. I used my hamburger flipper there to place my cake on top of the bottom section so that it is lined up very, very well. And just getting rid of some extra buttercream on the side there. It's a nice tall cake. I believe this cake was 10 inches tall. Okay, I am staking it, driving a wooden stake down the middle of it, because that actually is going to help me hold on to something if I need to while icing it. I don't really think I needed to for this particular one, but it also just it's such a tall tier that it just keeps my layers aware I place them. They're not going to move around on me, and then I can always cut this down at the end. It just makes me feel better about the stability of this cake. All right, now I am actually just taking my clean scissors and just cutting off the very edge of that cardboard round that was on the bottom of that tall section of cake that I put on the bottom section of cake, because sometimes that cardboard gets in my way when I'm buttercreaming. Not often, but every once in a while I think to myself, man, I should have cut that down a little bit because it's annoying me. So I just trimmed it a tiny bit there. Okay, I'm adding my buttercream on the top. You can see I added it using the Wilton Icer Tip because I'm in love with the Wilton Icer Tip. That's just the way it is. I love that thing. I use it for everything. It just really helps get buttercream on very quickly and easily. I smooth out the top first, And now I'm adding the buttercream on the sides. Again, with my Wilton Icer tip, going all the way up until I reach the top. And then once I get to the top, I'm going to add another round so that it rises above the top edge of the cake. Okay, so as I get up here, you will see I've hit the top now, but really here what I want is that extra lip, that edge to go over the top edge of the cake. You definitely want to have that because that is going to help you in the end if you want to smooth out the top. Okay. Now I'm using my Cake Heads bench scraper. If you don't have a Cake Heads bench scraper, you totally need a Cake Heads bench scraper. It's super tall, perfect for instances like this one. Okay, so I am just scraping down my buttercream now, like usual, making sure after each scrape I get rid of the buttercream that's on my scraper. Just holding it flush against my board. That's the beauty of the Cake Heads bench scraper. It's got that little handle there so that you can hold it flush against your board and make sure that your tier ends up nice and straight as you go along. I like to scrape just in small little sections as I go because it just helps me keep it straight and I don't have to worry about that. Okay, so here is where having that extra edge over top comes in very handy. Okay, so I am looking at my cake straight on. I'm bending down so that I can see the top edge straight on, and I am just pushing my angled spatula, we will call it, back, metal spatula, pushing it back from the edge, and that is how I get a nice, even top edge. Very quickly. There's other ways to do it that are a little bit more precise. I actually have those on Cake Heads if you want to come check that out. But if you want to get the job done quickly, then sometimes I just eyeball it like I just did. Okay, so this is just me moving this onto a bigger board for the rest of my project to work on using my hamburger flipper. Okay, and you can see how that wooden stake was really handy and moving it around. So another reason to stake it if you want ease of movement with your cake. Okay, I am moving on to, I'm going to make the honeycomb section of the cake. And this is the part that you're going to see in this new fault line trend. The honeycomb's going to come through. So I'm using modeling chocolate that has a tiny bit of fondant mixed into it because if you use straight modeling chocolate, sometimes that can get a little cracky on you. So I mixed a little bit of fondant in. I used that sewing tape to measure around my cake so I would know how long the section needs to be. And I am just going to roll it out. And I can roll it out relatively thin. I don't want this to be too chunky, but I am going to use an impression mat, a honeycomb impression mat on top of this. So you don't want it too thin that you can't use an impression mat and it starts ripping on you. So just keep that in mind as you go. Just rolling it till I get it relatively smooth. And I have my PME honeycomb design impression mat. Not expensive and very, very nice for this project, of course. We actually have bees at home. We are beekeepers. So I like this impression mat because the honeycombs are nice and small and tight the way that bees really make them, which is cool. You could use bubble wrap. I've seen that around, people using that, but this is food safe and it's just nice to have this impression mat. And it makes these honeycombs a little bit smaller than the bubble wrap in general does. Though I'm sure you can probably get a smaller size of bubble wrap than I have seen used. Anyway, moving on. Just make sure you're using this impression mat that you push down really well. The nice thing is if you didn't push down well enough in sections, you can always put it back over top and it will kind of fall into the little notches so you don't mess up the design, and then you can push again just to get, a really nice deep impression. Okay, I am not worried about the ends being perfect because they're going to be covered up by my buttercream in this fault line effect. So I just kind of trimmed them and rolled up my honeycomb. I put a little bit of powdered sugar on it so it wouldn't stick to itself. I wasn't really worried about that happening though. And then I rolled it. Okay, and you can see it's sitting there over on the side. And because it's mostly modeling chocolate, you can do that and it's not going to sag on you and get all messed up. So that's kind of the beauty of modeling chocolate. Then I used a little bit of water around the middle section of my cake, just a little bit. We don't want it dripping just enough so that we can unroll the honeycomb section on and keep it from sliding down. Okay, so you wanted to make this honeycomb section long enough so that you can overlap it here in the back. And then we're going to use an X-Acto knife and we're going to cut through both sections that are overlapped. Okay, so make sure you cut through both. And then that way you can pull off that little piece there, and then you can lift it up. You can pull off the section underneath and smooth this one back down, just pushing a tiny bit so it fits in there nice and snug the way it's supposed to. And that is how you get a perfect seam. If you did not know that little trick, that's a nice and easy way to do it. Now, it is honeycomb. It doesn't line up perfectly because of the honeycomb impression on it, but it's no big deal. That's just going to be the back of the cake. Okay, so I just got my excess powdered sugar off of the honeycomb section. Now I'm using Edible Art Paints, Honey Gold. Love this stuff. And I am actually using an oval clean makeup brush used only for cake decoration and dabbing on the Edible Art Paint Honey Gold. Not doing full coverage here, just dabbing it on in sections just so I can get a nice golden effect, highlighting the honeycomb. Okay, this Ayara, I think that's how it's pronounced. I'm not positive, but this is edible gold leaf, and it comes in these little tiny squares, and it's not on transfer sheets, so keep that in mind. They sent me some of the stuff to try out, and I like it. It's perfect for this particular project because I can just kind of fold back sections like so, and then dab the gold leaf on in little sections. Obviously I wasn't covering the entire honeycomb. I'm just putting it on in spots just to give it a little highlight, just to give it a little extra pizzazz. And you know, it's always very cool to have a little bit of edible gold on your cake, to tell your customers, because they just think that is the bee's knees. Look at me telling jokes. Okay. So I did that all around the cake, and I use that later on as well. So this is really cool stuff to have on hand. I like the extra shine it gives in little sections. Okay, so you can just put that all around. I actually didn't even use any water to stick it on because I had just put my paint on. I knew my paint was still a tiny bit tacky, so it just stuck on there well. And you can use a fluffy brush to kind of push it on if it's not, sticking super well for you. Okay, now to create this fault line effect, I've got my Wilton Isotype again because I told you how much I love that already. And I am putting the bottom section on. So there's kind of one round. And now I am putting another layer over top of that first layer. We want to kind of build up this buttercream a little bit because we want it to look like the middle section of the cake has been cut back a little bit to reveal whatever we've got there, right? That's the whole idea behind this fault line cake trend, basically. And so now I've got 3 layers using this Wilton Isotype. I totally recommend it. I really do use it every single time I ice a cake, so it definitely comes in handy. But I've got my 3 sections there, and now I'm just kind of turning it on the side and adding a little bit more to the top because I didn't feel like it was quite tall enough. Okay, so that is the bottom section, and I'm going to do one more round over top of that first one just to make sure I have enough buttercream on. Because you are going to have to scrape away, but also as a little twist, I'm doing buttercream stripes on top of this, so I really wanted to make sure that I had more than enough buttercream to get this job done. Okay, so now I am just scraping just to smooth it out. I'm trying to get it nice and smooth before I use my icing comb over top of it that is going to create the divots for my buttercream stripes. Okay, I've showed one way already on my YouTube channel and on Cakeheads of how to create buttercream stripes without an icing comb, but these icing combs are really fabulous. They're not super expensive. I haven't showed it to you yet here, so if you're wondering what I'm talking about, it's coming up, don't worry. Don't want to confuse you. but the icing combs are really cool and give you a little bit neater buttercream stripes. So I'm going to show you how to use those in a minute. Okay, I'm filling in any little gaps that I hear in my buttercream, and then I'll go back around and smooth again with my butter scraper. Again, don't take off too much buttercream. We're just doing this to get it smooth so that to prepare it for our next thing we're going to do. Then I added the same deal on the top of my buttercream cake here. Again, making sure that the top edge rose above the top edge of the cake, just like we did with the crumb coat before we put our honeycomb on. And then I'm smoothing this out as well. I am not worried about the edges of the buttercream that meet the honeycomb, because I want those with this type of cake to be kind of jagged anyway. So those do not have to be perfect. We're not worrying about those as we go along here. Here I am just adding that top lip again, just to make sure, so that I can have, so it will rise above the top edge of my cake. My original intention was to create a sharp edge on the top of this cake, but I decided against it in the end because I kind of liked the look of it being a little bit more jagged with this whole honeycomb theme here. So I ended up not making it a sharp edge. But regardless, it was good to have it go above the top edge of the cake anyway. You definitely want to do that. Okay, using my cake heads bench scraper again, now I'm smoothing out the top section here, just like I did the bottom. And this is what I am starting with before I use my striped comb on the cake. Okay, now I am just going to go along the top. And like I said, I'm not going to create a sharp edge here in the end. I want it to be a little bit jagged, but I am just taking off some of the extra buttercream. I don't want it to be too wild on the top there, we'll say. So I'm just removing a little bit of it. Now, as I go, because I'm going to be doing the stripes, I'm going to be, removing even more buttercream. So it's not going to look the way it looks now on the top. I wanted to show you these combs. I got these from Esther Cakes. I have a link to these icing combs in the post, but these are awesome. They're made of metal, and she has all these different kinds that will give you double stripes, thick and thin stripes, all different kinds of stripes, and then also the scallops you saw in the beginning there. I'm actually not using these combs because I didn't get them in time for this project, so I actually am using an acrylic buttercreams, an acrylic striped comb. But I like these metal ones because you can heat them up and get your stripes even more smooth. So I definitely recommend these combs. And they have a nice flat bottom, which not all combs have, which is kind of weird. But so that when you're scraping, obviously they'll lay flat against your bottom surface. So you definitely want to keep that in mind as well. But these combs are awesome. I wish I had had them in time for my project, but I didn't. So you won't see me using them, but I totally recommend them. I'll have a link, like I said, below. I have an acrylic one. The thing about the acrylic is you can't heat it up in a pan of hot water, which I would recommend before using it because it really will give you a smoother scrape when you do that, okay? I didn't get as smooth of a scrape here, but that's okay. This still worked. So if you already have acrylic combs, not all is lost. It still works. You just can get it a lot smoother if you're using the metal because you can stick those combs into a pan of very hot water. Each time you scrape, wipe it off, and then scrape with it, and it will give you a nice smooth indentation for your stripes. Okay, so I'm starting obviously on just the bottom section, doing that one first. And the bottom section juts out a little bit more than the top, so I was able to do it section by section. So keep that in mind as well in this project. I think it's a better idea to do it each section one at a time if you can work that out. But you can see it left the divots there, right? It took out striped divots so that I can then add a different color to those sections, which you will see me do in a minute. Okay, so this top section, I had to figure out a way to run my comb over the top section, but to keep my hand steady. And I was like, how on earth am I going to work this out? So I kind of built this little contraption here. I have my old turntable, and then I have another turntable, my favorite turntable, by Innovative Sugarworks, on top of that old Wilton turntable. And then I have a book on top of that, all so that I can turn my cake that's on another turntable. Yes, I had 3 turntables. You don't have to have 3 turntables. Have your cake on a turntable and build up with books a stack that you can rest your hand upon, or rest your hand and your comb upon, and then you can just turn your cake while holding the comb steady on the book in order to reach the top section of your cake here. Yes, I totally finagled, but hey, you know, that's what we cake decorators have to do sometimes, is finagle and figure out how to make it work. And so this is how I did that. And it really did work very, very well. I could just keep my comb nice and level as I turned my cake and create those divots with the comb up top there. Obviously, you'll notice after each turn, I am scraping off that buttercream as best I can. The better I do that, the less messy my divots will be here. But yeah, I totally just knocked over my microphone there. Sorry about that. Okay, so again, I'm just going until my divots are nice and deep as I can get them with my comb. But remember, in order to do this well, you have to have a thick layer of buttercream, right? Because you have to have those divots nice and deep so that you can add the buttercream different colors over top and then scrape over them, right? Okay, so this is what I've got. This is what I end up with before I add my different colors. And then I pop that into the freezer to get the buttercream nice and stiff before I add the colors into those stripes. I want to add black stripes, and I want to also add pale yellow stripes. But to get black buttercream, I use dark cocoa and black gel. Now, I was out of my Dutch super dark cocoa, like black cocoa, which I normally would use. So I had to use my Hershey Special Dark here, which is not black like my other cocoa is. But you can get black cocoa online, and I'll have a link to that in this post as well. And then I wouldn't have to use as much gel if I did have my black cocoa. So that's just one way to get some nice black buttercream. And then I use my Artisan Accents Sunshine Yellow Gel, just a touch of it to get a pale yellow buttercream. I didn't want this to be super bright yellow. I really like the pale yellow look. Okay, now with this comb, obviously I've got my white stripes, and then I want to add black and yellow. So the end pattern is basically going to be black, white, yellow, white, black, white, yellow, white. That's the deal, right? So that's kind of how I'm adding my color into these stripes here. So I have a disposable piping bag. I am the worst piper in the world, by the way. I have the unsteadiest hand. I know I should have my elbow resting against the counter, but I just could not work that out. So I just kind of, went at it. So all of that to say, don't worry if you're not a great piper. This does not have to be perfect, because we're going to be using a scraper over top of all of this at the end, and it's going to work out, so don't worry. So again, I got my pale yellow in a different disposable bag. I'm adding those stripes onto each section, and you can see, like, I don't have a full round for the edges that touch the honeycomb. But so this one here, I'm just doing black where there is the divots for the black and not worrying about the rest, because I wanted this to have kind of a little bit of a chopped off look anyway, because I just thought that worked well with the honeycomb. So I didn't really have to worry about that too much. Okay, now we're scraping it. So here's the deal with scraping it. I'm using black, which, black. Black is just a very intrusive color. And the reason I say that is because I wasn't at first getting all of my color off of my bench scraper here, and I was going back over, because that's what you have to do. You have to keep scraping until you scrape off enough so that just the stripes are left. And you will see that eventually happens, and it looks great. You can see it happening on the bottom in particular here. I started off scraping them both at the same time, and then I just actually continued on the bottom and got that done first, since that the bottom actually jutted out more than the top, like I told you about earlier. I focused on the bottom first. And you just keep scraping until it really smooths out for you. Fill in any gaps that you might have along the way, and then scrape until it smooths out really nice for you. The issue I had was that I was getting more black buttercream onto my other sections because my scraper wasn't completely clean when I was scraping off the buttercream. So I ended up changing that technique. I got a wet rag, a clean wet rag, and after each scrape, I would wipe off all the color on my bench scraper before I scraped again. And that helped not transfer that black onto other sections. But if you do see some black on other sections, that's why. See, I have my wet cloth there, and so I then wipe the color off after each scrape. And that really, I recommend that because that's very helpful. That will avoid you having to scrape too much. Because I first did it that way, I ended up scraping a little bit too much of the buttercream off, so I lost some of my yellow stripe there on the bottom. So yeah, start off with a wet rag so you can get all the color off in between the scrapes, and that will be very helpful to you. Okay, and now, again, going at the top and using my wet rag to get the color off after each scrape, and you just keep going until it starts to really clean up and look really great. I was really happy with how this came out in the end. Now, my final scrape around, I wanted to smooth it out as much as possible. So I boiled some water in a shallow, large frying pan, and I stick my bench scraper in, scrape off the buttercream, stick it back into the water, wipe it off, the excess water off with a rag, and then scrape along my buttercream, and that gives me a beautiful, smooth finish. So I definitely recommend that if you want to just, smooth it out just an extra bit at the end there. And just keep doing that until it looks good. Make sure not to go too far where you start losing your stripes. But just enough, and you'll have a beautiful finish at the end. Okay, I added my homemade honey drip. It's not real honey, but I needed to find something that would look like real honey because I was afraid real honey would just keep dripping down my cake and would never stop. So I put this concoction together, which I have shown how I do that on the rest of this tutorial, which is on cakeheads.com. I also show how I make the edible bottle topper and the edible honeybee topper as well over there on cakeheads.com. So you can come over there and check that out if you want to see how I make those things. And I'm just adding that drip to the top edge of the cake and the top edge of the bottom section here as well. I ended up putting it around the bottle topper as well. And this just kind of finished off the look for me. I liked covering up those edges with a fun little drip there. I'm also using this NFD, Never Forgotten Designs, I believe, Flash Dust, which is an edible glitter. It's gorgeous. Look at it. This is, I think, the creme brulee. Is that what I just saw? I'll have a post below for you. But I just kind of, I'm a glitter junkie. If you know me, you know this. So did I put glitter on? I did. I put glitter on the honey cake because why wouldn't you put glitter on? Oh, yeah, and then I put it in a pump bottle, and I sprayed it all over the cake. It's edible, and it's sparkly. I mean, it's a no-brainer, right? I'm a little bit addicted, like I said. Okay, so my cake is still a little bit chilled. I put it back into the refrigerator, freezer for a little bit, and then I added just a little bit more edible gold onto that bottom black stripe of the top section there. And that kind of finished off that edge for me. And yeah, I got my buttercream stripes on my fault line cake. Really happy with how that turned out. Oh, I'm just showing you how I'm using a hamburger flipper here to move my cake onto the board it is eventually supposed to stay on. And yeah, that is basically it. Buttercream buttercream stripes and fault line cake, honey themed. I've actually made this cake for my brother who loves to make mead and has a YouTube channel in which he interviews people, mead, and has them taste mead from meaderies all around the world. And that was a lot of fun to do with my brother. I did an interview with him. If you want to check that out, I will have this in the blog post that goes with this cake on cakeheads.com. Thanks for hanging out with me. Again, if you want to see the rest of those tutorials, you can come on over to cakeheads.com where we have all kinds of tutorials. And we have a family over there where we hang out and troubleshoot and learn the art of cake decorating online together. We'd love to have you join us. See you later.